I don't know. I think I could ever get a seat.
I'll probably be fed.
I'm great about it. I think you should put it in the back. Jonathan, you were not going to come up here and put it in. I don't think they're here in Canada. Welcome. Thank you very much for coming. A special day, the 24th day of Teves, to the yahrzeit of the Alter Rebbe, the founder of Chabad, the Talmud of the Maggid of Mezrich. The title of this evening is "Where Art Thou?" And I think that most people know the story that the Rebbe related about the time when the Alter Rebbe was in incarceration, the first time that he was arrested. But we'll tell the story anyway because there's a few points that we'd like to stress that are maybe not always talked about, or at least are not presented in the way that we'll try to present them. In a certain sense, the Alter Rebbe changed Yiddishkeit nothing less than the way that the writing of the Mishnah changed Yiddishkeit. And the reason I say this is because when the Mishnah was written, until that time, Torah learning was based on the memorization of the Mishnayos of texts. They weren't really texts, they were just things that people memorized. And without memorization, there was no way to engage in the discussion in the Beis Medrash. There was no way to engage, to be part of the discussion that was going on in the learning of Torah. So if you didn't have many Mishnayos memorized in your mind, then you really couldn't take part in the learning of Torah. And what that meant was that from the time that Moshe Rabbeinu had given us the Torah, the Chachamim, the sages of each generation, have been trying to expand the ranks of those learning Torah, of those interested in learning Torah. There's been different attempts to expand these ranks. When Rabbi allowed the Mishnah to be written, he actually expanded the ranks of the students in the Beis Medrash, because now, if you didn't have the best memory in the world, or if you were not, let's call it, gifted in that area of oral memorization, you could still take a text, something that was written, and begin to take part in the discussion. And that has always been the number one interest of the sages of each generation. How do we bring more and more people into the Beis Medrash? How do we make the Torah something that is relevant to more and more people? When the Baal Shem Tov appeared, there was a new tool that was available, but it wasn't clear what the scope of that tool would be. The Baal Shem Tov's innovation was that he began to interpret the Torah not just in the direction of how we are generically, as a community, addressed by halacha, but rather how we are addressed as individuals by the Torah. This is a tremendous change. When a person opens up the Shulchan Aruch, even when he opens up the Gemara, the Talmud, his feeling is that these texts are talking about him, but not in the personal sense. They're talking about him in the generic sense. Because I'm a Yid, I'm a Jew, and I'm obligated by halacha, and I want to learn those topics. So the Shulchan Aruch is also addressing me, but it's not specifically addressing me. It's not specifically looking at me. It's not specifically talking to me. It's talking to every Jew. Therefore, my engagement with it is, in a certain sense, it depends on how seriously I take it, but it remains in a certain way aloof. There's something high here, and it fits everyone, and I have to fit myself to it, but it's not really addressing me and my personal situation. The Baal Shem Tov began to change that because he discovered the inner workings of the psyche, the inner workings of the nefesh. It's not that the nefesh wasn't known before then, of course it was known, but what the Baal Shem Tov began to see was, like in the time of Rabbi, that if we don't begin to address the questions, the psychological questions that people are faced with, if we don't take the Torah and we begin to apply it to those questions, which are personal questions already, they're not just generic questions because each individual has a different psychological world inside, then we'll be missing the chance to make the Torah more relevant for more people. Now, it's not that everyone woke up in the morning and suddenly said, I have issues on the inside. It didn't exactly happen in 1760. It also didn't happen in 1800. It didn't even happen in the 1900s. But the number of people who become aware of their inner state of being, their inner psychology, their nefesh, increases since the time of the Baal Shem Tov. It's increasing and increasing to the point where today it's very uncommon to find someone, it's not impossible, but it's almost uncommon to find someone who doesn't say that he has some kind of psychological issues. It could be that it's not even his, it could be that it's his children, it's his wife, whoever it is, but everybody is aware of that inner world. At the time of the Baal Shem Tov, it was only beginning to become something that was coming into awareness. And it's been increasing since then. So instead of saying, well, the Torah doesn't talk about Moshe Genuth, it doesn't talk about any one of us as an individual, not as a Jew who's obligated by halacha, as an individual. So the Baal Shem Tov came and said, we can take what the Torah says and we can learn how to apply it to every single individual case and the psychological needs of every single individual. But we can do even better than that. We can begin to teach Torah in such a way that we don't lose anything, we're adding, but beyond the halachic interpretation, beyond the moral interpretation, we're also adding a psychological dimension which will allow people to begin to learn Torah and make it interesting for them so that they want to become part of the learning. They want to join the ranks of those learning. Once they see the power of this way of interpreting the Torah, it becomes something that they're interested in. If you look today, I actually did a very unscientific survey in Israel of how many Sfarim came out this year versus how many psychologically oriented interpretations of the Torah came out. It's about half and half. Meaning that people are flocking to understand how the Torah can be applied to their inner world. And that is the essence of what Hasidus started to do. Except there's a little bit of a problem. The problem is that the Baal Shem Tov didn't write anything. And the Baal Shem Tov spoke, and people understood what they understood. And there was no clear identification of what this path is, and where is it going, and what is it trying to achieve. The students with the Baal Shem Tov just lived this incredible persona, this incredible Ish Plaot, this man of wonder, who was able to perform all kinds of miracles. But underneath the surface, those who really got to the essence of what he was doing, understood that he was addressing each individual separately as an individual, as a person. He was leading towards this concept of personhood, which had not yet been really developed in Torah. It's developed to a certain extent halachically, but it's not developed in the sense that you could go to, there was no such thing, go to a psychologist, or let's call it what it was called at the time, a Rabbi, and he would look at you and say, this is how the Torah applies to you. Again, not in terms of what you're obligated to do, but rather what the Torah has to say to you in terms of helping you cope with your specific problems and specific challenges. The disciples of the Baal Shem Tov were not very many. Usually we count that there were 60. And the disciple who became his successor was the Maggid of Mezrich. And the Maggid of Mezrich also, I don't know if he was afraid of this or he felt the time did not yet come, but he also did not frame this in specific personal language. He also took the teachings of the Baal Shem Tov and he framed them as a general commentary on the Torah. When the Alter Rebbe came along, the Alter Rebbe knew already he was seeing people personally. In fact, we need to do a little bit of history for review. When the Alter Rebbe became the Rebbe of Russia, of Rusin as they called it, he was in a place called Lozhna. And he was there for about 25 years. And during these 25 years, more and more people came to consult with him. To the point where, after a while, they had to have takanos. And the takanos were such to limit the number of people that were at any given time in this village called Lozhna, because it became unbearable. There were simply too many people coming to consult with him. So the takanos of Lozhna were built in such a way that every person had a designated week during the year that he could come, and he could seek an audience, if he could find it, the Yechidus, with the Alter Rebbe. If he came at a different time, he would lose his privileges for the next year. And again, why was this? Because people began to do something that had not really been done before, which is to seek answers to them personally, not halachic answers, but answers to be able to deal with their personal problems. Now, usually if you have a problem with your chicken, you don't go to Rav. What's Rav got to do with the chicken? Or with a cow? Or what really was meant, and that's what the Alter Rebbe kept saying, stop coming to me with questions about chickens and cows. I meant you to come to me with questions of Avodas Hashem, which means, how do I serve God better? How do I come into a better state of mind, a better state of being, so that I can serve Hashem? And so he cried out about this a lot, but it helped him about as much as talking to a chicken. And they kept coming. And most of the questions were still of the nature of, what about my chicken? What about my cow? But there were many very serious people that came and asked real questions about their service of God. And what does it mean for them to stand before God in prayer? And what does it mean for them to be in a state of being cognizant of God and so on? And he gave many, many answers. And he began to develop everything that he had heard from the Maggid into an organized system that could help every person that wanted to seek personal health psychologically. And that's where the Tanya came from. The Tanya in the end was a compendium of many of these eitzas, many of these pieces of advice that he had given people in different contexts. And he tied them together into one larger volume. And it was published in 1797. And we have to get into perspective of when this was. America was founded in 1776. The Constitution was signed in 1789. We're talking about 8 years after the Constitution was signed. In 1797, he publishes this book of psychological advice, how to serve God, how to get over your problems, your issues, how to see yourself properly, the right way, and be able to stand in the best possible form that you can, mentally, psychologically, before Hashem. But still, this book did not speak to the individual. It spoke about groups of individuals. There are tzaddikim, there are beinonim, there are rishayim. Most of the people in the world are beinonim, but there's, many, many, many levels of beinonim. There was still no talk of one individual. What about one individual? What can you write a book about one person? Is there such a book? Is there such a thing that can be done? Should you even address people that way? In 1798, just about a year and a little bit after the Tanya was published, he was arrested. And he was arrested with very serious charges of leading a mutiny, rebellion, of supporting the enemy, in this case the Turks. And it was all, of course, a fabrication, but the charges was so serious that he was facing certain death. Because in Tsarist Russia, you couldn't get away from this, and certainly not if you were a Jew. Because if a peasant was worth half a person, then the Jew was worth a quarter of a person. There was simply no value to the life. And so he was, as we know, he was taken away in one of these black wagons, which meant that he was going to be executed. In the first volume of the Likutei Sichos, the Rebbe said something really incredible about the Alter Rebbe's state of mind. He says that when he was taken away to be executed, he didn't know that that he would be 53 days in jail and interrogated and questioned, and in his mind this was it. The Alter Rebbe didn't cry about it. He didn't lament about it. He says, the Rebbe says he was in a state of Mesiras Nefesh. Like a person saying, like he writes in the Tanya itself, that if there is a situation in which my life is at stake and may not come out of this situation, what is awakened is the Yechidah, the highest level of the soul. And it's a state of Mesiras Nefesh that many, many Jews in history have faced. And it wasn't a state of breaking down and crying and weeping and begging for mercy. It was a state of going with their head held high and saying, I believe in Hashem, and nothing can change that. So says the Rebbe, that was a state of mind, because this was the end. So he did what he could. He had led many hundreds, many tens of thousands of people over 25 years. He had written a good portion of the Shulchan Aruch. He had written the Tanya, he had published it. And says Rabbi, in the state of Mesiras Nefesh. Person says, I am strong with my belief that I did what I could, and if this is the end, so be it. I came to this world for a limited amount of time. Only God can decide when I finish. And if I'm finished, I'm finished. That's it. I did what I needed to do. But then, says the Rebbe, a very strange thing happened. They began to interrogate him. And that was not common for people who were about to be executed. Says the Rebbe that the Rebbe Rayatz told the story that was passed down that the interrogator turned out to be a Talmid Chacham. He doesn't say a Talmid Chacham. He says a Baki in Tanakh. He knows the Bible. Even that's very surprising. How much did he know the Bible? So the question, this big interrogator is coming to find out, did he support the Turks? Did he do this? Did he do that? What's the question he poses to the Alter Rebbe? Explain to me why God said to him where he was. So why did he have to ask him that question? Interrogations start this way, right? It's already something off completely. What's going on? So you want to kill me? I'm already in a state of Mesiras Nefesh. Oh, you want to belabor it a little? You want to? So I don't care. But suddenly he begins to ask him something about Chumash, about this question. Of all the things he asked, this was the question. It could be that he started reading the Bible, and that's the first place he came to a question. Bereshis bara Elokim, so Shemayim v'Sa'aretz, that he understood perfectly, but then suddenly he came to, where art thou? That he didn't understand. I'm saying it could be. But the rest doesn't make any sense either, because the Alter Rebbe began to answer Rashi's answer. What's Rashi's answer? That it's very frightening for Adam to suddenly, especially after he sinned, to suddenly be accosted by the Almighty, coming to him all at once. So he had to, and the interrogator stops him and he says this, Rashi's answer I know. He knows Rashi's answer. Where does he know Rashi's answer from? Not only does he turn out to be a person who knows questions in the Chumash, he also knows Rashi's answer. And he's not satisfied with Rashi's answer. Without a doubt, he had the Alter Rebbe's attention already. There's something different going on here. This is not what they do, even in Tsarist Russia. Even in that strange world, things like this don't happen. And he's not satisfied with Rashi's answer. So the Rebbe has to come up with a new answer. Says the Alter Rebbe, doesn't say where he got this answer from, but it's pretty clear where he got it from. He says, when a person has reached such and such number of years, and he mentions a number, we'll come back to that number. And he is being asked by God, where art thou? It means, where are you in terms of completing your life's mission? Where are you in terms of fulfilling the reason for which your soul came down into the world? That's the answer the Alter Rebbe gave. And the interrogator was satisfied. As it turned out, the number of years that he mentioned was the exact age of the interrogator. Why is this important? Usually when the story is retold, it's taken as some kind of Ruach HaKodesh that the Alter Rebbe had. It's like a parlor trick. He knows how old he is. But that's not how Ruach HaKodesh is used. Ruach HaKodesh means that a person has, by his intuition, some deep understanding of the truth of the situation. It's not a parlor trick. It's like a deep understanding. It's usually related to Das, according to Rashi. Anashim, Chachamim, Navunim, V'Yiduim. Yiduim, he mentions those who have Ruach HaKodesh, which judges need in order to perceive the situation properly. Ruach HaKodesh is a sign. It's not a trick. When it turns out that someone had Ruach HaKodesh, it's a sign that he had a deep perception of the reality he was facing. And the Alter Rebbe took this as a sign, not as some kind of trick that he had performed for the sake of who we don't know. It was a sign for him that what he had just said was exactly correct. Where was this interpretation from? This, as we said, is the basis of Chassidus, the basis of what the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid were pushing towards, but could not yet say fully, openly, that the way the Torah needs to be interpreted now is that God is speaking through it to each individual personally. Why? What's the reasoning behind that? That every individual, man and woman, has a goal, a purpose to fulfill in this world. And the Torah is the vehicle through which we can measure and learn and ascertain and test whether we understand what our mission is. This is not Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch doesn't talk to the individual. It's not even Talmud. The Talmud does not talk to the individual. It talks to us as a collective. But says the Alter Rebbe, where art thou is not to Adam, it's to you and me and everyone here. And it's asking every day of our lives, where do we stand in this thing called life, which is a fulfillment of the mission that we need to complete and for which our soul came down into the world. Now again, when you hear this in 2023, it may not be such a big innovation. But in 1798, think about it. We're just after what they call the French Revolution, where people were not treated as human beings at all. And think about what the end of the 18th century was like. There was no yet appreciation and no acceptance of this concept of individual personhood. And the Alter Rebbe is giving an interpretation of a pasuk, which everyone knows. And again, look at the distance between Rashi's explanation and his explanation. Rashi says, Nichnasim bidvarim. He started gently to talk to him so as not to frighten him. Talking about Adam, what's it got to do with me? How is that relevant to me? Now, God doesn't talk to me that way, and I have no fear of him suddenly frightening me. It's not relevant. But says the Alter Rebbe, I have a new interpretation, and this new interpretation means that Hashem is constantly asking me, not in a frightening or a challenging way, but in a constant, real way. What are you doing with your life? Where are you going? Where have you taken it so far? How much have you finished of what you need? What this also implies is, you better figure out what your purpose in life is. It's also a very important part. If you don't know what your purpose is, a person can't say, well, my purpose is to finish the Shulchan Aruch. Because he's obligated from day one and everything. You can't say, oh, so far I finished Siman Aleph Beis Gimel. I'm up to your idea. Kufay. You can't say that. You have to know before your bar mitzvah. You have to know the whole Shulchan Aruch. You don't know? So start learning. But you can't say up to where have I come, because that's not how it works. You have to do all of it. But now there's a new continuum, which has nothing to do with the halacha. It's a whole different phase of human development, and it's coming and saying that the life of each individual is something that the Eibishter cares about in terms of writing the Torah in such a way that it should guide you. Again, not in the halacha that you keep, but in ascertaining how much of your purpose have you achieved. Completely new idea. And again, the historic context is very important, because to think about this in 1798 was impossible. We're 130 years before, well, not 130, 120 years before Freud. There's no psychology in the world yet. Nobody would come, he was already a psychologist for many years, because many people would come to him and treat him like somebody who needed to help them. But he still couldn't say this statement, which is that each one of us has a mission. That was a revolution in understanding the Torah. And the moment you understand that you have a mission, and God gave you this mission, so you begin to look for, okay, so how do I understand it better? How do I find it? How do I understand it better? How do I complete it? How do I fulfill it? That wasn't the end of it. The Rebbe continues and he says, or he asks rather, why did the Alter Rebbe need the sign from above to begin to publicize that every individual has a mission, that every individual's life is something that has a beginning and an end with a purpose from Hashem? Couldn't he just say this? The Rebbe answers that you can't just say something like this. You have to have a skama from above. You have to get an approbation from the heavens that it's okay now to reveal this to the world and to now refocus people on a form of learning Torah that will engage them, that will become something that touches them personally, even though this is not how Torah was learned for the previous 3,200 years. Why? It says because at the heart of this revelation, that every person has purpose, at the heart of this revelation is a paradox. It's a very difficult paradox. It's one we have to solve every single day. And it's not so easy to solve it. What's the paradox? When I learn Torah, I don't see that it's talking to me individually. In fact, the part of me that understands Torah is the part that is diametrically opposed to me being an individual. Very important to understand this. I learn Torah with my divine soul, with my nefesh elokis. My nefesh elokis
does not have an experience of being separate from everyone else here. Which is why, initially, the way of learning Torah was such that it didn't address the individual Jew, because it couldn't. On the face of it, the Torah is speaking to the divine soul. And again, this, if someone says, what's the big difference between the Nefesh Elokis and Nefesh Behemis? There are many, many differences we can point out. But the experiential one is that in the Nefesh Elokis, I don't feel an individual. I don't feel separate from everyone else. So therefore, when the Shulchan Aruch says that I should wake up like a lion in the morning, it doesn't have to say Moshe Genuth at the beginning. Even though I signed my name on the book on the outside, but it doesn't have to mention my name. Why? Because I'm like everyone else. It's generic. That's how the divine soul understands the Torah, that whatever the Torah is saying is also about me, but not because I'm me, just because it's about all of us. So the divine soul understands things in an anti-personal way. Only as I'm a generic soul in the world. That's all I am. We're all the same, there's no differences. Except for the guy in Monty Python who says, I'm no. Well, there's a kid in Monty Python. They say, we're all individuals. He says, I'm no. So except for that guy, the Torah was talking about everybody. Same, equally, same. Again, you're no different. You have blue eyes, you have brown eyes, you were born to these parents, those parents, you were born in this year, that year, it's all the same, it doesn't matter at all. But to come and say that the Torah is now talking about me as an individual means that I have to begin to understand the Torah not with my divine soul, but with a part of me that understands my individuality, that gives me my individuality. Which part is that? The animal soul. That's a huge shift. So now I'm going to have to begin to understand the Torah based on how my animal soul understands it. That's a completely different way of understanding Torah. Because the animal soul doesn't get it. If I begin to say to someone, look, you need to interpret the Torah based on your individuality. So what will they say? Okay, I'll write my own Shulchan Aruch. I'll decide what I do and what I don't do. This fits me, this doesn't fit me. This I like, this I don't like, and so on and so forth. And then Torah naset adarim adarim. It becomes like herds and herds, each one doing whatever they want. That's what they say. They just say that in the time of the coming of the Mashiach, the emet will be ne'ederet. The truth will become like scattered flocks. Every person will do whatever they want. That's not Torah. So how do you reconciliate these two approaches? So it says the Rabbi, for him to be able to say something like that, he had to be able to bridge that paradox. He had to have a way in which to, on the one hand, learn the Torah the way that the divine soul learns it, but be able to explain it properly to the animal soul, which is responsible for the individuation of the person. So he had to create a bridge. And a bridge is not easy to create. That's already something new. Just to continue with something that you already know, that's easy enough. You have a tradition. But now, the Baal Shem Tov never created a bridge, and the Maggid never created a bridge. There's no bridge there. When you learn it, you're learning only something that talks to the divine soul. That's why they're different. When you learn their teachings, you feel right away, this is like Chazal. This is not talking to me directly. But the Alter Rebbe suddenly has this He knows all the years that this is what he needs to do, but he can't do this until he gets a sign from heaven that it's permissible, that he has the bridge, that it's permissible for him to begin to explain to people that you need to learn the Torah as an individual, meaning with your animal soul, in a way that your animal soul will feel that the Torah is right, that it's talking to you. And yet, on the other hand, it won't mess up in the sense that it will say, okay, so if it's talking to me, I get to choose whatever I want. That's the difficulty. So he needed, says the Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe needed a sign from Shemayim that he had already built that bridge, that he knew how to build that bridge. That's what Chassidus of Chabad is. That's how it's different from other Chassidus also. Because the way that the Alter Rebbe explains things, and the way that all the Rebbeim that followed him do it, is that they translate between the understanding of the divine soul into the language that even the animal soul can understand. That's their big chiddush, the big bridge that is Chabad, between the divine soul and the animal soul. What happened next? So he had a sign. He had a sign now that it was proper and it was okay to begin to teach this. But it wasn't enough, because he went back to his cell, and then he had a vision. The Rebbe Rashab sent the Rebbe Rayatz once, the fifth Rebbe sent the sixth Rebbe once, to go and see if 3 people can fit into a cell in the, I forgot the name, yeah, say it slowly. Yeah, that one. Okay. He wanted to see, can 3 people fit in there? So he obviously thought it wasn't just a vision. It was something much more real than that. He had a vision of his two spiritual mentors, the Maggid and the Baal Shem Tov. And he asked them, why have I been arrested? Now you have to understand, now he's no longer in the same state that he was before. Because the moment he's asking that question, he understands that there's an end game here that doesn't lead to his execution. His state of mind has to now be different. Because if he was expecting to just be executed, it doesn't matter why. Kiddush Hashem. There's no answers to that question. It's what Hashem decides. Your life is over, it's finished. But now he understands that there's an end game that involves him being released, maybe, or something like that. And he says, why am I here? What do I need to correct when I go out? Meaning that he now thinks that there's a possibility that he might go out. It's changed his whole perspective. He says, I'm not finished. Until now, I thought I did all I could. I was never given reshus. I was never given an approbation from Shemayim to describe exactly how to bridge the divine soul with the animal soul. I was never given this. But now, I just came back from an interrogation where it seems that that's what just happened. So he asks the Maggid and the Baal Shem Tov, who have revealed themselves to him in his cell, why am I here? So they say to him, because you were teaching the Teves. You were revealing too much. So this is very perplexing. What was I revealing too much? He wasn't revealing what he wasn't allowed to reveal. So what was he revealing? So he says, so maybe I didn't understand what just happened. Does that mean that I shouldn't reveal this way of understanding Torah that will bridge between the divine soul and the animal soul? And they say to him, on the contrary, you should reveal more and more. So he took that as a second approbation. And indeed, he was released. And so, of course, The moment he got back to Lozhna, what did he do? He changed everything, right? He now started to teach in length. No, he didn't do anything. Nothing changed. One of the amazing things is that after he returned to Lozhna, he continued doing everything the same. There was some slight difference in how much he explained, but it's negligible. When we look at the way he spoke before the incarceration, the way he spoke after, there's almost no difference. In both cases, it wasn't fully explained. It wasn't the full bridge. And that's a big question that needs to be answered. Why? Search low and high for an answer to it. I can give a speculation why he didn't change it, but I have no proof that it's true. Nothing changed. And 2 years later, in 1801, he's arrested again. And the second time he's arrested, he said that even though the accusations were much lighter, the incarceration itself was much worse. It was much more difficult for him, even though the conditions of the arrest were even good, because he could have a minion in his cell, but many things that were much easier. In any case, he came out of the second arrest also. And when he came out of the second incarceration on the third night of Hanukkah, one of the conditions was that he would stay in Petersburg and he wouldn't be allowed to return to Lozhna. It looks like he didn't fight it very much. And he stayed. He stayed in Petersburg. And even after that condition was lifted and he was allowed to return to Lozhna, he never did. He never stepped foot in Lozhna again. What happened? He met a nobleman in Petersburg that liked him a lot, that got to know him, and said to him, "Tell me what you want, I'll give it to you." So he sat with him on his lands. He sat on a map of this nobleman's lands, and he saw that he had a village that was about 20 kilometers from Lozhna, a village called Liadi. And he said to him, "Build me houses in this village. I need 3 houses." So he sent his messengers to Liadi. I don't know how far Petersburg is from Liadi, but it's pretty far. I don't know if it's like a 5 days journey, 2 weeks journey, I don't know, but it's far. And they went there and they built him 3 houses. And at the end of the summer of 1801, he and all the people that were accompanying him moved to Liadi. They never went back to Lozhna. But when he arrived in Liadi, we know pretty much everything that he said from that moment on, because everything was documented. Before then, we have not such a clear picture of everything that he said. But the moment that he set foot in Liadi, everything changed. He began to speak in tremendous length, and not just to say a mimer, not just to say an essay once. Sometimes he would repeat it 2 or 3 times the same day, and on the same day give 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 even explanations on what he had said. And so we have maimarim that they themselves are very clear, and then he adds dimension after dimension after dimension of explanation on them. Why does he do all this? What suddenly happens? It seems that the second time that he was arrested, it's not far to speculate that he felt that he was arrested the second time because he had not fulfilled what he was supposed to do, or he couldn't do after the first arrest. I said there's speculation about why he couldn't do it, but he didn't do it. Everything stayed the same. But once he came out the second time, he came to Liad, he came to a new place. It's sort of Mishanem Makom Mishanem Mazal. You change your place, you change your mazel. And he changed the whole way that he thought. And he began to explain things in a way that every person that heard this understood how the Torah was talking specifically to him. And many, probably over 50% of his essays begin with the same concept. The soul came down into the world to fulfill a purpose. Why is it worthwhile for the soul to come down to this world? More than 50% of the Maimar, even though they don't deal with that, then what he's now going to explain is meant to help us understand what our purpose as individuals is and how to find that purpose through the Torah and fulfill it through the Torah, but as individuals. And that became the basis of everything that is Chabad. Now, what does it mean? What does this all mean? This is a long historical lesson. I don't know how much you enjoyed it. But what it's saying is that the Alter Rebbe changed the way that we understand the application of Torah. And he needed an approbation from above, but in the end, that's what he did. He took the Torah that was understood as speaking to us as generic individuals and turned it into something that there's a personal mission that it's describing, and each person has to understand the Torah personally. Has to figure out what used to, there's a basis for this in Chazal. It's not something that he made up. What's the basis in Chazal that they say? That every person has a letter in the Torah. Well, it's not exactly Chazal, but it's much earlier than the Alter Rebbe. Every Jew has a letter in the Torah. Okay, but the letter is not very descriptive. But he comes and says the entire Torah is talking to you. And you have to figure out what the individual message is to you. And you have to figure out what your purpose is and how you fulfill it. When the Rebbe came along, this became the basis of what Chabad is. What does Chabad come and say? There's tefillin. I know there's a generic mitzvah to put tefillin on. But the tefillin is put on by someone specific. And so I'm not just interested in you as a generic hand that I can put tefillin on. I'm interested in you as the individual for whom tefillin is part of the story. There's a great story to illustrate this that I heard directly from the person who experienced it. Somebody who was doing mivtzaim, was doing tefillin on the train in Eretz Yisrael, and he was doing it with Mendel Kutterfass. And they were going from cabin to cabin in the train and asking people to put tefillin on. And this man who was doing the tefillin, he was quite young at the time, he was in his early 20s. He came to someone who was seated, an older guy, and he asks him, do you want to put tefillin on? Right? In Israel, you don't have to ask, are you Jewish or not, although today you do. But back then you didn't need to. Everybody was Jewish. So he asked him, would you like to put tefillin on? He says, no. So he tries to convince him, and he spent some time. In the end, he gave up. And he went on, and then half an hour later, he comes back the same way that he had gone, and he sees Mendel Futterfass putting tefillin on this guy. So he says, I'm not hurt, but I want to understand. Why is it that when I asked you to put tefillin on, you didn't want to? And when Mendel Futterfass asks you, then you are willing to. So the person said very simply, he said, when you wanted me to put tefillin on, it was for you. When he wanted me to put tefillin on, it was for me. That's the difference of the Torah before the Alter Rebbe and after the Alter Rebbe. Before the Alter Rebbe, my hand is a generic hand. It doesn't need the tefillin. What needs the tefillin? God's command. For the tefillin to be filled, to be complete, they also need a hand. Any hand will do. But after the Alter Rebbe, this hand needs filling. This particular hand. It's me. I am not complete without it. I'm beginning to look at the individual as the Torah is serving the individual, not the individual serving the Torah. What is that like? That there's a discussion in Tana de Eliyahu, who came first? The Torah or the Jewish people? And the Tana de Eliyahu, and the Rabbi mentioned this many times, he paskins Eliyahu Navi, who in the beginning he's not so nice to us, but in the end he becomes our big advocate. And he says that from the fact that the Torah says, Daber el Bnei Israel, speak to the children of Israel, we learn that the children of Israel came first, otherwise there would be no point in the Torah. So this is understanding that it's the individual that needs the Torah. Not the Torah needs the individual anymore. But it's also true, it also needs, I'm not saying that it doesn't need it. Torah also needs. But the switch is now to understand that it's the individual that needs this. But the switch is not just about the Torah as an obligation, but especially the Torah as a guide. That now the Torah, the way that we understand it today, has to be to understand it. The Alter Rebbe wants us to understand it as how does it apply to every single individual differently. Not in terms of the obligation, but in terms of helping them get through their lives. These beautiful things that we say are not meant to convince someone this way or that. They're meant to help people feel that there is a light that can guide them, that there is wisdom that can translate to their specific condition, to their specific state of mind, to their specific animal soul, and can lift it, and can bring it out of its drudgery. And more importantly, first and foremost, making them feel that they have purpose in this world. And that God is constantly standing over them, not to check if they did what they were supposed to do, but asking them, have you fulfilled yourself yet? Have you found your way to ensure that what you're capable of is also what you actually do? Or are you still in a state in which you either don't know that you have purpose, which is the worst thing possible, which is what causes the person to lack interest in life, to lose interest in life, and all the more so, even more than that, that this Torah can help you not just find the purpose, but also be able to pursue it and to fulfill it. It's so deep, in fact, that the Baal Shem Tov, again, he didn't say this about the individual, he said this in general. But he said, he darshaned the pasuk in Eov, it says, Nishmat Shakai Tavinem. Hard words to translate always in Eov. But it means something like, the soul of Shakai, of God, will give them understanding. And how does he explain it? He says that we have to, when we learn Torah, through our soul, through our individual understanding, I said that too quickly. When we learn the Torah from our soul, that provides us with understanding. is that I have to learn and ask myself, what does my soul understand that this pasuk is saying? Again, this is a different dimension from halacha, because in halacha I can't ask that question, it's not irrelevant. But everything that I learn in Torah, I have to ask from the point of view of my soul, what does this mean? And then when I have an answer to that, that's the Torah that gives me understanding in order to live my life. So this is the great vision of the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid that the Alter Rebbe fulfilled. And he taught the method of how to bridge between the divine soul's understanding and the animal soul's understanding, so that every person, and this is not just the Jew also, this certainly includes every single person who wants to come close to Torah, even if he's not Jewish, how they can find their purpose and fulfill their meaning in their lives. I'm not very good at endings. So maybe we'll do another niggin for the Alter Rebbe before that. So,
you very much, Rabbi Genuth, for that awesome, meaningful, beautiful lesson. This is the kickoff of a series that we're having at Mayan called Mondays at Mayan. Same time, same place next week. We're going to have a share by Dr. Irving Leibovitz on B'tafin. What does B'tafin mean in 2023? The week after that, Rabbi Moshe Brisky. So please come again. Thank you so much, Rabbi Genuth. It's very, very powerful. Have a wonderful night, everyone. Thank you.
We have roll-ups in the back with QR codes. If anyone take a look at those and scan whatever is of interest to you. Thank you.